I had learned how to allow my silence genuinely to make me a liar, that I wasn't allowing myself to genuinely be the authentic version of who I was because it was so ingrained in me that that would not be accepted. And I truly still do not believe that a lot of difficult conversations are ultimatums. However, if it does come to that, and I have to decide between making you happy and making me happy, I'm going to choose me.
Hi, I'm Blake Schofield, founder and CEO of The Bridge to Fulfillment. Mom to 3, USA Today top 10 professional coach, and former corporate executive who got tired of sacrificing my life for a comfortable paycheck. My mission is to expand perspectives to achieve greater impact at home and work without sacrifice. This is The Bridge to Fulfillment. I'm so excited to share today's guest expert with you. Her name is Amy Green-Smith, and she's a certified and credentialed life coach and hypnotherapist, masterful speaker, and personal empowerment expert. Amy uses her roles as coach, writer, podcaster, and speaker to move individuals to a place of radical personal empowerment and self-worth. With an acute focus on helping people find their voice, she is highly sought after for her uncommon style of reverence, wisdom, and humor, and has been a featured expert in Inspired Coach magazine and on Fox 5 San Diego. What a powerful conversation I was able to have with Amy. And many of the concepts we talk about, I see consistently with high achievers, perfectionists, people pleasers, and those of us who often can acquiesce what we need in order to not create waves. She offers some really practical tools to easily be able to share what you want and need in a positive way that enables you to truly use your voice to create more positive relationships, working environments, and a life that is more aligned with who you really are. So with that said, I'm really excited to share this interview, and I hope that you take at least one thing from this and apply it in your life in a powerful way. Hello, Amy. Welcome to The Bridge to Fulfillment. I'm so excited to have you today.
Hi, Blake. I know we're going to just have the best conversation.
I'm so excited about the topic. What we're talking about today is something I feel really passionate about, and it's something in my own personal journey that I had to really work to find my voice. So I know the audience is going to get a ton out of what you share. But before we sort of dive in, I would love for you to share a little bit about who you are, your background, and sort of how did you end up passionate in doing this work?
Yeah, so I think we should probably do a little disclaimer at the top. I was chatting with Blake before we hit record, and I let her know that in the spirit of authenticity, my authentic self is a bit of a sailor or a bit of a swear bear, as I like to. So if you do have any young kids in the car, or you are adverse to a couple of colorful pieces of language, then you might want to listen to this without the kiddos. But yeah, so to discuss kind of my journey that has landed me in this particular career. I think for many of us who are in the quote expert space, we kind of had to learn our lessons the hard way, and that eventually becomes what we teach. And my situation is very much the same. So for a bit of context, I grew up in a very, very conservative, born-again Christian family. And my father had a master's in divinity and a doctorate in ministry. So he was not fucking around. And so I grew up with a lot of messages around what constituted being a good person, and also sort of predicated on this notion that I was already innately broken and needed saving. So there was a lot of inspiration to people please and to twist and contort and put up a facade. And, by all accounts, I was the proverbial good kid. I think you and I have a similar background in that way. Any overachievers out there, any eldest children who might be listening. So both my two younger siblings ended up doing jail time, had trouble with the law. I started working when I was 14, put myself through college, moved out of the house young. And this all kind of comes into play a little bit later. So in '07, my father passed away. And at the time, I was transitioning from working as a makeup artist into the personal development space. So I felt extremely convicted that I was going to do his makeup for his viewing. And I also felt, yes, so this is the dead dad makeup portion of the show, everybody. Blake's giving me a look. And I also felt very strongly that I wanted to speak to a crowd of hundreds of people that day. I mean, it was really a no-brainer. So as we're getting back to my mom's house, I'm feeling like I won at daughter that day. Like I'm winning at daughter. And my mom finds it the most opportune time to say to me, it feels as though your father and I have failed as parents because the three of you, grouping me in with my two siblings, we're no longer subscribed to the faith traditions we were raised with. And she said, quote, you aren't walking with the Lord. And really the only thing I could kind of muster in that moment was, I don't think you should say that to a child, right? And I'm thinking, I just did makeup on my dad's corpse. I spoke to a crowd of hundreds. I've checked off all the good daughter boxes. And I'll tell you what, Blake, up until that time, I had such an artifice. I had such a veneer. I would prep my partner and I would say, every time we go to my parents' house, no cussing, no drinking, no smoking, no liberal agenda, no Jon Stewart, no South Park, right? Like just keep all this stuff really buttoned up. And so I had learned how to allow my silence genuinely to make me a liar, that I wasn't allowing myself to genuinely be the authentic version of who I was because it was so ingrained in me that that would not be accepted. And so that became a very pivotal moment for me where I truly still do not believe that a lot of difficult conversations are ultimatums. However, if it does come to that, and I have to decide between making you happy and making me happy, I'm going to choose me. And that was the first time that stance really took hold for me. But I'll tell you what, it was a shit show after that. Like it was like the floodgates had opened. And now I wanted to fight about everything. I wanted to have difficult conversations. I also think I was bolstered by it being one against one as opposed to one against two. And so it wasn't until many, many years and many arguments of me needing to walk back my delivery, not walking back my stance or my opinion, but actually saying, hey, I still feel very strongly about what we conversed about, but I never should have said it in that way. You didn't deserve to be spoken to. And so after many, many times of doing that, I kind of went, oh, you can actually give voice to really polarizing topics with the utmost grace and kindness. You can ask for a divorce and do that with grace and empathy. You can ask an adult child to move out of the house with compassion and love. And you can speak up for yourself. You can tell your family you don't subscribe to the faith traditions you were raised in with the utmost grace and kindness. And that really became the impetus behind the work that I do now, which is that internal piece of believing that your voice matters, that you're worthy, period. And then the external component of, okay, if that's the truth for me now, how does that inform difficult conversations, saying no, boundaries? What does that really mean? And it has really kind of come full circle for in my own life.
That's so powerful. There's so many things that you shared. And the one thing I have seen to sort of be universal is that we often think our experience is just our own, but very rarely are we actually alone. Are we broken? But
That's right.
What we're experiencing is part of the human condition, and we get to choose how we experience that. So I wasn't the oldest daughter, but I am the baby. But very early on, I learned that being the good daughter was making everybody else happy and saving them.
Right. It's
and
preferable.
My sister, who is older than me, was far more willing to speak her truth and was heavily punished in a lot of cases for speaking that truth. And so I learned really early on not to do that. that it wasn't safe and that there was a right and a wrong way to live life. So it's interesting to hear your experience because there's a lot mirrored there. And I think previous generations were really taught that, right? Children should be seen and not heard. This is the way life is. Life just has to be tough. You just need to do what your parents say. If you don't believe what they do or do what they do, then you're disrespectful. And what's interesting is what I often see is that for many, our personal growth journey starts in our careers. It's actually a safer place to begin to change the patterns in our lives, I think, often than our closest relationships or our family, where it feels riskier or the stakes are higher. I know that was certainly the case for me, where I was finding myself in environments where I was constantly burning out or dealing with circumstances where, honestly, some of the people I worked with or for were very toxic in terms of the way that they treated me. And because I had belief systems that I had to be the good girl, I had to be a team player. If I spoke up, right, then I could be blackballed. I either enabled or put up with a lot of that abuse. And it's taken me, a 7-year journey to through my career and changing my life and learning a lot about this process to be able to own that and say, and really recognize that there are so many of us that experience that. I was a very shy child. At 2 years old, my sister spoke for me. So when we talk about this topic of learning how to speak up for yourself, for me, it was a journey of even at 6 or 7 years old, I wouldn't even go order dessert at a fast food restaurant because I was so petrified to speak to people, to today where, I'm really able to share a lot of things personally from that journey. And I think that there are so many people out there that are high achievers that believe that they have to behave in a certain way in order to be accepted, loved, or successful. And that sounds like what your journey really was. And so I'm interested to hear for you, because the breaking moment for you was at your dad's funeral, and that final moment of I've done all of this and it was not good enough for you. I've turned myself upside down. I've pretended to be this person. I've done all these things to make you happy and it wasn't good enough. That moment when you said, enough, I choose me. I had that same moment myself, but before that probably preceded months or likely years of those moments of misalignment and pain and trying to figure out how to share your voice. And so I'm interested to understand, what were some of those and how did you maybe baby step into it? Because it can be really challenging to do that in a family setting, but sometimes it can be easier to do that in a work relationship or a place where you can begin to start to learn that your voice does matter and it feels less maybe heavy.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that you mentioned there that I think warrant highlighting. One is that we oftentimes will look to other relationships, not just intimate partner relationships or familial, but oftentimes work-related, to heal wounds from our past. So for example, let's say, we'll take your exact scenario. Let's say you then go into a work world where somebody really reminds you, a colleague maybe really reminds you of your sister. And so every time she speaks up, you feel this oh my gosh, she's speaking for me. I need to speak for myself, right? And so you'll look for new people that can be emblematic of healing opportunities from your past. And it's not always childhood. Sometimes it's a first marriage or, your collegiate years or something like that. But oftentimes, because that is all ingrained as a behavioral defense mechanism in our subconscious, it's registered in our mind as safe to acquiesce or to people please. And so if we have a boss or somebody who reminds us of mom or dad or our primary caregiver, sometimes we will work in the same way to try to glean that love or that acceptance. So something that I think we can't discuss this without talking about the concept of people pleasing, because people pleasing is that perspective or behavioral tactic of, I need to make sure everyone else is happy so that I can be happy, right? And so essentially you're putting your happiness on hold kind of forever. And I think it's quite synonymous to our worth as well. Like when we say, then I'll be happy, usually what we're really meaning is, and then I'll be worthy, then I'll be enough, then I'll be valuable. So the thing that's important to understand about people pleasing is most of the time, and I know you've talked about this on the show before, that we develop associations with certain things early on in our life. So for many of you listening, it could be that maybe you grew up in a situation where you had a really volatile caregiver. So you learned to walk on eggshells, make sure that they were taken care of, don't rock the boat, right? We have all of these idioms for it. And so you learned that there's this positive association with people pleasing, meaning if I take care of everybody else or make sure mom's okay, then I can slide under the radar and my life is easier. Well, now that there's an ingrained positive association with that, we take that into the first marriage, the second marriage, the workplace, the second career, the whatever, even with children, because that's how we know to take care of ourselves. But there's also a very real reason why we are compelled to do that. And if you look at things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of our primary human needs is for one of belonging. Well, this stems from our ancestors who needed to belong to a group in order to survive. Right? So there was no tribe of one. You had to gain favor with that group in order to survive. So that has now translated into our modern humanity where we go, oh my gosh, if this person doesn't hire me, if I don't get this promotion, if I don't get this joint venture, that must mean I'm going to die. Right? That's on a subconscious level. We don't ever actually think that. But then we call forth all of those defenses. So what we have to really know about people pleasing, and I think this is extremely important, especially in your work world, is that the defense tactic of taking care of everybody else can be rooted in self-preservation, much like it was for you as a child. And it can also be motivated from a place of outsourcing your self-worth. And those are two very, very different motivators. So if we're talking about the former, I was interviewed by a woman who's an incredible, brilliant Black woman. And she said to me, I just had a baby and I was in the hospital and I made sure that I laid it on thick with all the doctors, all the support team, all the nurses to be as kind and amenable and as sweet as I could possibly be. Do you think I was people pleasing? And I said, I think you could put it in that category. However, I think the motivation is totally different because we know at least in the States, that of all the developed nations, we have the highest mortality rate for women in giving birth. And it's exponentially worse for women of color, specifically Black women. So you going in there doing that, knowing that there is an actual legitimate risk to your life and well-being and to your child, you were motivated from a place of self-preservation. This would also be very similar to really wanting your boss to like you or really wanting something to go well at work because you really need the job. You need that to survive, right? You're motivated from a place more of self-preservation. Now, conversely, and I would say more prominently, we're motivated from a place of outsourcing our self-worth. I need this person to love me. I need this promotion. I need this boss to approve of me, my in-laws to like me, in order to be valuable as a human. And sometimes there's crossover, but that's one of the basic frameworks that I think people need to start asking themselves is, am I searching for this approval or am I searching for this go ahead or affirmation from a place of, I need this job to survive or I need to not get hurt in this moment? Or is it, I don't feel valuable unless I have that approval? So that can be one of the very first places to look, I think.
I think that's so good. And what you covered, it took me, a long time to actually recognize how often I was being triggered from a lack of safety when, right, leadership changes would happen, when business wasn't good, when I had a boss who was unrelenting and no matter what I did, wouldn't be happy. And also, right, that I was chasing achievement, hoping that the next achievement would make me happy, right? Both of those telltale signs of exactly what you're saying. And I really didn't recognize that those are truly recipes for massive burnout.
Yes.
I have never seen a high performer who hasn't gotten to this place and then had to really question and start looking at what else they needed to do differently. I think those of us who take the time to invest in ourselves and learn different approaches or figure out how to get what we want without having to compromise, come to be able to understand that a lot of what we're experiencing from stress and anxiety are actually these internal things, right? These triggers, these experiences that we can control and change, that we actually have power over our brains and that what our brains tell us isn't always accurate.
That's right.
And then I see a different subset of people that get stuck in that and get learned helplessness and believe that they are powerless to the environments that they're in and just get sicker and sicker and sicker.
Mm-hmm.
But at the heart of what we're talking about, being able to find and share your voice, I think most people struggle with this. And even those that might look boisterous and might share their opinion still are doing so from a place of some sense of trigger, some sense of desire to be seen in a certain way. And so I'm interested to, kind of take this conversation and talk about maybe, I guess, one of the things I would share, which is one of the things I've really learned is if you can allow the space between the incident happening and your response, you can learn a lot.
Yes.
Often those of us that grew up to be people pleasers and want to make other people happy really didn't learn how to develop or listen to our own voice. And for me, that has been part of the journey, is to recognize that I was so used to an experience happening, immediately thinking about everyone else and how everyone else felt and what that solution was that would make everyone else happy, that what I needed or what I was thinking or what I was feeling, I actually just bypassed entirely. Just didn't even know and thought, well, if I just make everybody else happy, to your point, then all will be good.
Yes.
And my journey had to really come to understand that you can't be responsible for other people. You can't heal other people. The only person that you can really be responsible for is yourself. And that through allowing space and being able to spend time to actually say, how am I feeling in this? Why am I feeling this motivation or this fear, or that this is the way it has to be? You can create the space to actually start to see the circumstance more broadly than I think you could otherwise. And so I'm interested in your perspective. Does that align with sort of what you would suggest, or there are different perspectives that you might have to layer into that approach?
Yeah, I think there are a handful of things that you can do to start kind of shedding light on this topic, because when we're talking about personal development stuff, it's not as tangible as learn these investing tips and you either make money or you don't, right? Or lift these weights and you either get a strong abs or you don't, right? So it's a little bit different, because what we're talking about is stuff that you can't usually see. It's stuff that you can feel. So a couple of things came up for me as you're talking. One is, we're going to have fear no matter what, right? We're going to have fear when we're onto something and we do need to step up and put our voice out there. And we're also going to have fear when we're in legitimate danger. So one of my favorite questions when you're trying to discern, am I trying to outsource my self-worth, or am I in a little bit of a pickle here, is to ask yourself the question of, am I in danger? Or is this just new? Because if something is just new, if it's the first retreat you've done, if it's the first speech you've given, the first time you've gotten back into the dating scene after being divorced, those red flags, that inner critic is going to sound the alarm bells and go, bitch, are you sure? Are you sure this is new? We might die. So you have to discern, is this just fear showing up because something's new? Or is this something that my livelihood is genuinely threatened, or the lives of my children, et cetera? The other question that I love to pose to people when they're trying to figure out, where do I start speaking up, is to take a stock of, what are the things that I chronically complain about, and about whom? Because many times we will be speaking up, but not to the person who can do a damn thing about the grievance. So maybe I'm upset with you, Blake, and my partner gets an earful, or I'm upset with my sister and my therapist gets an earful. So sometimes and I've heard you talk about how we get locked in that victim stance, right? Where we get well, I could be happy if only you would do all these things differently, right? And when we're talking about finding our voice or speaking up, almost always antithetical to that is that investment in what other people think, that people pleasing. So if we can look at, where am I so charged about what other people think that it tempers or dampens how I'm willing to speak up, where are those situations, and is it in a way that is costing me something? So I'll tell you a story. Years ago, I was doing community theater, and there was a gentleman who showed me a meme on his phone that was incredibly disparaging to a mentally and physically disabled child. And to me, that doesn't constitute humor. Like, don't show me that and expect me to laugh. Now, the easy thing in that situation would, to appease him, to acquiesce, would be like, oh, haha, and just like walk away. But I have this firm commitment that I will not allow my silence to make me a liar. I don't accept that behavior. It's not okay with me. But I also don't need to get into a full-on TED Talk about it either. So my sort of bridge statement to him was, hey, I don't actually find that funny. So I would appreciate it if you just didn't share that stuff with me in the future. Anyway, are we running act 3 or who's doing this, whatever. Change the subject entirely. Because I think oftentimes we think if I do give voice to something, now I have to litigate my case and I've got to share all of the reasons why, instead of saying, hey, I don't feel the same way as you, but we certainly don't need to get into that right now. So I think starting to check in with yourself of, are there things that and I'm not talking about just venting or like releasing some steam. I'm talking about one consistent issue that you constantly complain about, or a person that they would be so surprised to hear the extent to which this bothered you. That usually is an indication of like, ooh, this person is someone I need to start speaking up with or have a boundary or a tough conversation. So do a little inventory on that. And I can promise you, once you start to heighten that awareness around it, it starts to become insidious to deal with any longer. Like I like to say that your bullshit tolerance starts to get lower and lower once you realize like, oh, I should not be spoken to in that way, or that's not okay, or that's disrespectful. So taking a little bit of an inventory, and then also checking in with yourself. Am I actually in danger if I speak up, or is this just new? Maybe it's the first time in that conversation or in that relationship.
That's powerful. What you focus on expands. And so to your point, focus on it, it will become more evident. One of the biggest places I see people get stuck is then they blame that person. It is this person. And I just really want to say it's very human nature. And I think as a society, we do that all of the time.
Yeah.
But the reality is you're triggered by that person. Therefore, you're responsible for your reaction. Mm-hmm. And when you make the other person responsible, they're constantly irritating me, they're the problem, they're whatever, you abdicate any responsibility, control, opportunity that you have to create change, and you really paralyze yourself. And I can say this as somebody who grew up with that sort of mentality, like it's the boss, it's this person, it's whatever, I can't work with them. And it's taken me a long time to understand and appreciate is that all relationships are opportunities for healing. Mm-hmm. It's just often that we misunderstand the lesson we're being given.
Sure.
What I can now say, in a journey that I've had and with my clients is to be able to understand that sometimes the people that trigger us the most are teaching us our greatest lessons. If we're able to really understand and look at why is this person triggering me? What is it about this circumstance that doesn't feel in alignment with me? Yeah. And when we can begin to understand it's actually a gift and use it to speak our voice, speak our truth, no longer tolerate things that are unhealthy for us, we can create a far better trajectory. And I think those of us that we're used to people pleasing, I don't know about you, when you went into the thing, Amy, about like, I have to explain it, 100%, that is exactly what my experience felt like growing up. And even in my early career days, well, if I feel this way, I have to have all this evidence to convince you that the way I feel is right.
That's right.
I think that's often why we end up as people pleasers, because we see things differently than the people around us. And we're told that we're wrong or not okay, or we should be compliant.
Yes.
And as a result of that, we lose connection with our inner compass. We second guess how we see the world. And often I see with people pleasers a similar thing to what I experienced and really have had to work through, which is we take 100% accountability for all of the issues going on. That's and we don't stop and say it's a co-creation. Where is that person's responsibility versus my responsibility? To be able to identify, is this a place where I need to speak up? And if I spoke up, I could create change. Or maybe this is actually very unhealthy for me. And the evidence shows the other person isn't willing to create change. And then therefore I need to advocate and leave and do something better for myself. And I think often people pleasers are so used to trying to make everyone else happy and accepting accountability and responsibility and not trusting their inner voice that they can end up in very toxic circumstances and blame and question their own experience for a really long time. I see this over and over and over again. And I think it's a huge detriment to yourself, but it also a detriment to the other people who aren't held accountable or don't even know that what they're doing might offend you or might not be the best approach from a communication standpoint.
Yeah. Well, something that we're kind of dancing around that I think is important to talk about is that most of the time, what the people-pleasing behavior, it's not that we are going, I'm going to make my life really fucking difficult. I'm going to set it up so that I'm going to make everybody else way more important than me. And that's going to really do a number on my self-worth. And that's just how I'm going to cope with life. No, none of us do that on purpose. And genuinely, when we're showing up in an inauthentic way, we're not showing up to try to be malicious or to be ill-intended. So a perfect example, I was going out to breakfast with my best friend, and I wasn't really paying attention a whole lot when she was reading me the menu, which was my bad. We get there, it's way more of like a brunchy lunch place. And I was really, really wanting some French toast. So I look at the menu. The people-pleasing option would be so easy to say, oh, no, sure, it's fine. We can just eat here. Now, if she knows me well enough to go, you're lying. Like, why are you lying to my face? And I really think it underlines for people that we feel safer with individuals who tell us the truth in a kind way. Right? So there's this fallacy of if I don't put everybody ahead of myself, I'm going to be a dick. I'm going to be an asshole. And it's like, no. People feel safer with you if they know where you stand and where they stand with you. So to her, I said, I hate that I'm doing this, but I really wanted French toast. I am so sorry. Is there any way we can go somewhere else? And she goes, thank you so much for telling me the truth, because she's also used to, again, to your point, we have been healing friendship wounds together through this relationship. She is used to people who blow smoke up her ass. And I don't, and if I'm asking everybody listening, what are the types of intimate partnerships, bosses, friendships that you want to attract to yourself? It's probably not a bunch of liars. So we need to be the people that we want to attract. And I think one of the biggest problems that we've had, and we haven't talked about, the pressure of our culture and our society disproportionately on women. You think about the toys, at least if you are an elder millennial or older, the toys you grow up with are all caretaking toys. You learn very quickly that you don't get the science kit or the NASA rocket or whatever. You learn that you need to pay attention when this baby cries. You need to cook this food. You need to clean this house. So you learn a lot of subservient ideology from a very early age. You layer on religious influences, how academia is structured, and now you get an entire culture where women have to work extra hard to be heard, period. So what do? We yell and scream because we hear that, oh, you have to be like a man in order to get ahead. So there's so many responsible parties, to your point. Like at the end of the day, all we can do is decide if we're going to be vocal or not. But I think it really is important for us to understand that we didn't start off with the same cards to play that everybody else did, right? That men specifically started off with. I know my brothers didn't get a shit ton of messages about don't hurt someone's feelings. You need to take care of them at all costs, right? And that's not unique to a religious environment either. So we have to recognize that systems of oppression are set up in such a way that it is extra difficult for anyone who's an oppressed party, and here I'm using women, to believe that they are enough, to believe that they can take up space, that their voice matters. You have to fight extra hard because we're already the second box under male, right? It's already, we have 4 fathers. We don't have 4 mothers. It's already Mr. for a dude. But women, we need to know if you're eligible because your currency is in if you can procreate and your beauty, right? So, and fortunately, a lot of that stuff is changing. But we cannot discount the societal factors that are contributing because we have an individualistic culture that tells us, no, Blake, it's your problem. What's wrong with you? And so we internalize everything from an individual standpoint, not realizing that the system is fucking rigged. So no wonder it's extra difficult for us to contend with people pleasing or to be worried about what other people think. But once we have that awareness, now it's our responsibility to do something with it. So with regards to speaking up in your life or finding your voice, one of the phrases I use all the time is, I need to at least give that person the opportunity to be what I need. Now, there's a chance they will be like, yeah, I don't give a shit. But if they have no idea that something bothers me, or to the degree of how much it bothers me, then that's on me, right? That's my responsibility to say, hey, I haven't been super vocal about this in the past. And in fact, I had a client who did this really recently. And I think this is a great, great anecdote because of a couple of things. One of which is that she was struggling with people pleasing, but was not what we normally think of as a people pleaser. She's gregarious, she's outspoken, she's in a high level in her career, a lot of authority. And we typically think, oh, if someone's a people pleaser, they're probably really shy and introverted and kind of a wallflower, maybe a repressed posture. But that's a very myopic view of what that really is. Right? Because I will talk to many people and I go, oh yeah, well, are you highly invested in the opinions of other people? And they're like, oh yeah, but I'm not a people pleaser. And I'm like, oh, got it. Okay. Got it. So she was in this situation where she had spoken up many times to her boss, but she had delivered it in a way that was a joke, or like, sure, just give it to me, give it to Amy, she'll take it, of course. And so she's speaking up, but not in a way where she can actually be heard. So we tweaked her approach and we used vulnerability, which I know you've had some great guests talking about vulnerability as well. So she goes in to her boss and she talks to him and she says, hey, listen, I don't think I've been really forthright with you about how big of a deal some of these issues are. And she just softly and clearly stated the issue, as opposed to dressing it up with passive aggressive comments or jokes. And he has completely changed his story, right? And as absolutely helping her out. But if you think about what usually happens in those situations, if one person is making a joke, the natural thought process or logic for the other person is, I'm sure if it was that big of a deal, they would tell me. I'm sure if Blake was that pissed, she would tell me. That makes logical sense. But we just expect that everybody's going to magically know how they've hurt us and how could they not see it? Well, if it's that important to you, then it's probably worth speaking up about. So just checking in, have I given that person the opportunity to be what I need? And that's a great compass to figure out, to your point, do I leave? Do I get out of this institution or this marriage or this whatever? Or do I have some more cards to play? Do I need to show up and speak my truth a little bit more clearly?
That's so valuable, what you shared. I think often when we grow up and we don't feel like our voice matters, or we feel like we're asking for things and they're not taken care of, we don't fully develop a full understanding of how to ask for what we want efficiently. And I can't tell you the number of clients I've worked with that have felt like, well, I gave feedback or I asked for what I wanted and I was punished, or these things happened to me. And then in really diving into what was shared and how it happened, it's clear that it was the approach and not actually the what the request was that created that circumstance. And so I would just say, I think what you're sharing is really powerful in terms of stopping and saying, have I actually given this person the opportunity to meet my needs or understand what I need or partner with me to create this change? And do I know how to do that in a way where that person will be receptive? Because to your point, people that are people pleasers often develop an ability to read other people.
That's right.
And a deep empathy for other people. And that's how they're achieving what they're achieving. They're achieving it without that other person having to say it. And so then they believe other people should know how they feel. And that's just not reality. Number one, right? You're not the people that you're reading and taking action. Maybe you're reading them correctly. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're doing stuff that they haven't even asked you to do. And you're taking on responsibility that's not your responsibility, which is part of why you're burning out. And then on the flip side, then you're disappointed that somebody doesn't see what you need, but you actually haven't developed the skill to ask for it in an effective way. So I'm interested to hear from you, like, you mentioned vulnerability. What are some other things somebody could think about how to have some of those conversations in a way that could be heard so that they can start to learn the skill of how to ask for what they need or give that other person the opportunity to either meet them or show them, hey, this is who I am and this isn't workable?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a couple of frameworks. The first one is sort of, I call this sort of a boundary recipe, and it's threefold. It's saying, here's the circumstance, or here was the situation. Here's what happened. The second part is to say, here's my interpretation. Here's how that landed for me. Here's what I made up in my head. Because most of the time we go, you do this, and then you're condescending, and then you micromanage, or then you try to instead of saying, here's what happened, and here's what I made that mean. Here's how that landed over here. Here's what goes on in my head. So you're taking responsibility for your interpretation. And then finally, here's my request, right? So this anecdote that I shared with you about this client of mine, she had a breakdown. These are the main issues. And then here's how that lands for me. Here's how that is interpreted on my end that you probably would never see or hear unless I shared it with you. When I get that email, when I get these things, blah, 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 here's what it feels like for me. Here's what it sounds like. And then here's my request, which is an offering of a solution, right? Here's what I would love to toss around with you. Now, a couple of hacks which by the way, when I teach this, we work on this for months. So this is a very distilled down version of this, but just to give you somewhere to go. A couple of other things that are great communication hacks. One is to ask for the time to talk. This is for a couple of reasons. One, so that you can get your shit straight ahead of time and not be like a deer in the headlights, but also to give them a little bit of space to know what's coming down the pike. Because if any of you listening have ever had that situation where someone's like, we need to talk right now, you immediately go into your defenses, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn, which is not a productive way for us to have a conversation. Do not say to somebody, we need to talk. Please say something like, hey, Blake, I've got a couple of things I'd love to run by you. Do you have some space in the next, week that you might have 30 minutes to chat? If that person says, sure, what's it about? Tell them, but don't get into it. So it might be something like, you know what? I don't feel fully settled about the conversation that we had the other day about how we're going to organize the podcast production, right? I don't feel fully settled about it. I certainly don't think we need to get into it right now, but it might give you just a little bit of something to think about. And I'd love to just dig into that a little bit more deeply. So tell them, because it sucks to be on the other side. And if you are anxiety prone and somebody just tells you we need to talk and doesn't tell you what it's about, guess what you're thinking about for the next 72 hours? You're going to be worried about that conversation. So that's one piece, asking for the time to talk. It also sets up what I like to call the conversation container as one that is based in respect. I give a shit about what your schedule looks like. I give a shit about what mine looks like. I'm not just saying I need to talk, so you need to bend the knee. I'm saying what would work for you. So saying, I've been thinking about a couple of things. I'd love to run some stuff by you. I'd love to get your thoughts. Those are great phrases, stock phrases to use. Then when you start in the conversation, a way to use vulnerability is to say your piece in the matter. So to say something like, with the client that I used earlier, she owned her shit by saying, hey, I know I've vocalized a lot of this, but I haven't said it in a way where you could genuinely hear what a deal breaker it is for me. And that is wildly unfair to you. So I really appreciate, again, using gratitude as vulnerability. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit and talk with me. So she's owning her piece in the matter off the bat, and she's also expressing gratitude. Those two things are huge vulnerability entry points. Even just saying, I know this is so awkward and uncomfortable. This relationship means a lot to me. And so I really appreciate you having this. Just saying, thanks for doing this uncomfortable shit with me can be a great vulnerability entry point. Sometimes John Gottman will call it a soft startup. And then you would just deliver your recipe. You would say, hey, listen, here's what happened. Here's how it landed for me. Here's my request. You may also have to ask for just what you need in the conversation. So it might be, I would really love to just get through a couple of these issues, and then I would love to hear your perspective. So your first request might be, please don't interrupt me, but saying that much more kindly. And then one other great communication hack that is not a hard and fast rule by any standpoint, but is to mitigate using the word you as much as possible. So if I'm saying to you, Blake, you never responded to my email, that sounds way more accusational and therefore eliciting your defenses than if I said, hey, Blake, I'm not sure I saw an email come back. Like, I'm not saying you. Immediately when we say you, it feels accusational. If your partner is taking their day out on you and you say, I feel like you're taking your day out on me, to say instead, I'm wondering if there's stuff at work that's at play here, stuff that happened at work that might be coming up between the two of us, right? It's a way to address it without going, you suck. So there's sort of a Cliff's Notes of how to handle some of those difficult conversations.
I love that. And it's such good advice. I hope those of you guys listening, if you're not in a place to stop and take notes, maybe come back, take some notes. And, I always encourage you, take at least one thing from the podcast and action it. So what's the one place you see that frustration that you can take that step forward and give that person the opportunity to hear your voice and to meet you? Amy, it's been such a pleasure. I know we are literally almost out of time. So what I will ask you is, how can the audience find you? And is there anything else you'd like to close out to share that you haven't already?
So my corner of the internet is amygreensmith.com. And all of those names are spelled the basic bitch way. Nothing exciting. But I've got tons of freebies over there. I did a podcast for 11 years. So I've got a huge back catalog, some free hypnosis, some free workshops and workbooks for you. So please come over and hang out. And then, like any self-respecting Gen Xer, I hang out the most on Instagram. You can find me under the handle, Hey Amy Greensmith. And that same handle on pretty much all of social. But yeah, what would I leave everybody with? Another thing that I love to really impart is this idea that you are responsible for your intention, not your reception. And what I mean by that is that how you are received by other people is all across the board. Some people might be apathetic. Some people might think that was the best thing they ever heard. And others might think that you are the devil incarnate. None of those things you can control. You can control, however, your intention, which I think of synonymously with who you are being, how you are showing up. So when you look at all of these situations with these people that you are upset with or that you have grievances toward, check in with yourself and your own intention. Have I shown up in a way in which I can be proud and that I've set myself up to actually be heard? Because most of the time we communicate out of our emotion and out of our passion, and not necessarily to find common ground or to genuinely be heard. And that's what we all want. We just want our needs met, but we just haven't been taught a really thoughtful way of how to get that and how to handle that. So you are responsible for your intention, not your reception. So when you find yourself heavily invested in how you are received by somebody, check in and go, am I proud of how I'm showing up? Is my intention clear? Because that's all I can control.
So powerful. Thank you so much, Amy.
Oh, thanks so much, Blake. I've had a blast.